In Milano's restaurant in the charming college town of Millbrook, an 80-year-old woman was about to face the ultimate family betrayal. What started as a birthday celebration took a shocking turn when she came face to face with a nursing home. Brochure and the words, "Your new home awaits." Eleanor Hartwell wasn't your typical octogenarian. For over 4 decades, she had spent her life as a distinguished literature professor, known for her sharp intellect and fierce independence. A widow who had raised 3 children while building an academic career, she had never backed down from a fight that mattered. When she encountered her family's secret plan to strip away her autonomy, she had no idea they were underestimating a woman who had spent decades teaching others to think critically and stand up for what's right. Eleanor's refusal to go quietly would lead to a battle that would transform not just her own future, but her entire family's understanding of love, control, and what it truly means to care for someone. What began as a devastating birthday ambush would become a masterclass in aging with dignity. The quiet streets of Millbrook would never be the same after Eleanor Hartwell proved that being 80 doesn't mean surrendering the right to author your own story, and that sometimes the most important stands we take are the ones that teach the people we love how to love us better. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Eleanor Hartwell had always believed that dignity was earned through small, consistent choices. At 80, she maintained that philosophy even as she sat across from her family in Milano's familiar warmth, watching Rebecca fidget with a wrapped package that somehow felt wrong. The restaurant buzzed with the usual evening crowd, college students debating literature over wine, faculty members dissecting departmental politics, townspeople enjoying quiet celebrations, normal life continuing around them while Eleanor sensed something shifting beneath the surface of her own. "The salmon was excellent," Eleanor said, setting down her fork with deliberate precision. She'd learned long ago to read the room, a skill honed through decades of faculty meetings and family dinners. David sat to her right, his nervous energy radiating outward like heat from a furnace. Rebecca occupied the chair directly across, her marketing executive's composure intact, but betrayed by the tight grip on her water glass. Sophie, 17, and still believing the world could be made fair through sheer force of will, had chosen the window seat where she could watch Millbrook's evening rhythm. "Before we order dessert," David began, then stopped. His eyes found his wife's face, seeking something Eleanor couldn't identify. Eleanor's internal warning system activated. That particular tone in David's voice, formal, apologetic, and somehow guilty, had preceded every difficult conversation they'd had since his father's death 5 years ago. Rebecca reached for the package, her movements precise. "We have something. For you, Eleanor. A gift that we think will. Well, that addresses some concerns we've been having." The wrapping paper was expensive, Eleanor noticed. Heavy stock with embossed silver flowers. Rebecca's attention to presentation, even in betrayal, was somehow fitting. Eleanor's fingers worked the tape methodically, aware that 3 pairs of eyes watched her every movement. Inside, beneath layers of tissue paper, lay a glossy brochure. "Sunset Manor Assisted Living," she read aloud, her professor's training keeping her voice level, even as something cold settled in her chest. "Where every day brings new possibilities." A note was paperclipped to the front cover, written in Rebecca's precise script. "Your new home awaits. We've scheduled a tour for Tuesday at 2 p.m. The words hit Eleanor like physical blows. She looked up to find David's guilty expression, Rebecca's determined anxiety, and Sophie's growing horror as the 17-year-old began to understand what was happening. "I see." Eleanor set the brochure down carefully, buying time while her mind processed the magnitude of what she was seeing. "And when was this decision made?" "Eleanor, we've been discussing this for months," Rebecca said, leaning forward slightly. Her voice carried the practiced calm of someone delivering bad news to clients. The incidents have been increasing. The fall in November. You've been documenting my life. David cleared his throat, the sound harsh in the restaurant's gentle ambiance. Mom, we're worried, all of us. Even Jennifer thinks. Jennifer? Eleanor's careful composure cracked slightly. My daughter in California has opinions about my daily existence? She's been part of the conversations, Rebecca Yu continued, her marketing background evident in the smooth delivery. We've all agreed that it's time to consider safer alternatives. The burned dinner last month, the missed doctor's appointment, the what? Eleanor's voice carried the authority that had once silenced unruly graduate seminars. The evidence of my declining faculties. Sophie spoke for the first time since the brochure appeared. Grandma Eleanor, did you know they were planning this? No, sweetheart, I did not. The silence stretched between them like a fault line. Eleanor could hear the restaurant's normal sounds, glasses clinking, quiet laughter, the soft scrape of silverware on plates. Life continuing normally while hers was being dismantled without her knowledge or consent. The facility is beautiful, Rebecca pressed on, falling back on her professional skills. 24-hour medical staff, organized. Activities, a library. You'd have your own apartment, but with support available whenever you need it. Eleanor picked up the brochure again, studying the carefully staged photographs. Elderly residents arranged around a chessboard, their smiles bright and empty. Others walking in a manicured garden, supervised and safe. A common room filled with people who looked content but somehow diminished. How long have you been planning this? She asked. David shifted uncomfortably, his academic's mind probably cataloging the ways this conversation was failing. Since the fall, really. But we wanted to research options, make sure we found the right place. You wanted to present me with a fait accompli. We wanted to find solutions, Rebecca said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. Eleanor, I watched my mother struggle alone until it was too late. I watched her dignity disappear piece by piece because no one wanted to make the hard decisions. I won't make that mistake again. Eleanor understood then. This wasn't just about her family's fears. It was about Rebecca's unprocessed grief, her guilt over her mother's decline, projected onto a situation that might not warrant such drastic measures. Understanding, however, didn't lessen the sense of betrayal. She stood, her movements deliberate and dignified. The restaurant seemed to quiet around them, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. I need some air. Mom, please. David started to rise. Sit down, David. The command in her voice was unmistakable, drawing on decades of classroom authority. I'm going to walk home, alone. We'll discuss this later, when I've had time to process what you've shared with me tonight. Eleanor, you can't just leave, Rebecca said, her voice climbing slightly. We need to talk about this rationally. Eleanor met her daughter-in-law's eyes directly. You made rational decisions about my future without including me in the conversation. I'm making a rational decision to remove myself from this one. She kissed Sophie's forehead, feeling the girl's tension. Happy birthday to me, she murmured, and walked out of Milano's with her spine straight and her dignity intact, leaving behind a table of shocked faces and an untouched dessert menu. The October air was sharp against her cheeks as she walked, the familiar streets of Millbrook. Each step felt like an act of defiance. The sidewalks she'd walked for 40 years, the houses where neighbors still waved, the college buildings where she'd shaped young minds. All of it suddenly felt precarious, as if her family's lack of faith in her competence might somehow make their fears reality. When Eleanor reached her Victorian house on Elm Street, the home she'd shared with Thomas for 4 decades, where she'd raised 3 children and hosted countless dinner parties, she found evidence of Rebecca's efficiency everywhere. The kitchen. Step stool had vanished. Her good carving knives had been replaced with duller, safer alternatives. The small Persian rug in the hallway, the one she'd supposedly tripped on, was gone. Eleanor stood in her violated sanctuary and felt something crystallize inside her chest. They thought she was fragile, diminished, incapable of fighting for herself. They were about to discover otherwise. Eleanor stood in her violated sanctuary and felt something crystallize inside her chest. They thought she was fragile, diminished, incapable of fighting for herself. They were about to discover otherwise. The house felt different now that she knew it had been surveilled, catalogued, deemed inadequate. She moved through the rooms with new awareness, seeing them through her family's eyes. The slightly loose banister David had noted, the throw rug Rebecca had removed, the stack of mail on the kitchen counter that might suggest disorganization, rather than Eleanor's deliberate system of sorting bills from correspondence. Sleep proved impossible. At 2 a.m, Eleanor made tea and settled at her desk in the study, Thomas's old domain, where his law books still lined the shelves alongside her literature texts. If this was war, she needed intelligence. David's laptop bag sat by the front door where he'd left it during one of his recent visits. Eleanor had always respected boundaries, but boundaries, apparently, were a courtesy her family no longer extended to her. Inside, she found a folder marked Mom Care Options with printouts of their correspondence. The emails revealed the depth of their surveillance. Jennifer's messages were clinically precise. David mentioned another fall in November. Any cognitive changes noted? Rebecca's responses were detailed dossiers of Eleanor's daily life. Forgot doctor appointment Tuesday. Found burned pot on stove last week. Seems increasingly isolated. David's contributions were the most painful, apologetic, conflicted, but ultimately complicit. I hate doing this behind her back, but she's not going to admit she needs help. Maybe if we present it as temporary? Eleanor sat back in Thomas's chair and allowed herself a moment of pure fury. Then she channeled it into strategy. By dawn, she had begun her counteroffensive. A yellow legal pad, Thomas's preferred tool for complex cases, became her battle plan. Step 1. Documentation. If they could catalog her struggles, she could document her competencies. She started a detailed journal of daily activities, noting times, tasks completed successfully, social interactions, physical capabilities, cooking breakfast, prepared oatmeal, fruit, coffee without incident. Physical status, walked to mailbox and back, approximately 200 yards, no difficulty. Cognitive function, balanced checkbook, completed crossword puzzle, remembered all items, on grocery list. At 8:30, she called Harold Brennan. Hal had been Thomas's closest friend since graduate school, a lawyer who'd specialized in elder law before retiring. If anyone understood the legal complexities of involuntary placement, it would be him. Eleanor? Hal's voice carried surprise and concern. Everything all right? I need legal advice, Hal, about my rights regarding involuntary placement in assisted living. A pause. Has someone suggested you can't make your own decisions? Someone has made decisions for me, without my knowledge or consent. Tell me everything. Eleanor laid out the previous evening's revelations, her voice steady, but her hands shaking slightly as she spoke. Hal listened without interruption, occasionally making sounds that suggested he was taking notes. They can't force you anywhere. Eleanor, he said finally. Not without a court order declaring you incompetent, and that requires evidence of significant cognitive impairment. But families have ways of creating pressure, financial, emotional, social. What do I need to protect myself? Documentation of your competence, medical assessments, legal paperwork clarifying your wishes. And Eleanor? His voice gentled. You need allies. People who can testify to your capabilities if this escalates. Eleanor was writing furiously when she heard a car door slam in her driveway. Through the window. She saw Sophie climbing out of a rideshare vehicle, her school backpack slung over one shoulder, her face set with determination that reminded Eleanor powerfully of herself at that age. "Grandma Eleanor?" Sophie's voice carried through the front door. "It's me. Can I come in?" Eleanor opened the door to find her granddaughter's eyes red-rimmed but fierce. "Shouldn't you be in school? Shouldn't you be in a nursing home?" Sophie shot back, then immediately looked stricken. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean... I just couldn't sit through calculus knowing what happened last night." "Come in, sweetheart." They settled in the kitchen, Eleanor making fresh coffee while Sophie paced like a caged animal. "This is so messed up, Grandma Eleanor. The way they ambushed you, made plans behind your back, it's like something out of a dystopian novel." "Yes," Eleanor said quietly. "It rather is." Sophie stopped pacing. "What are you going to do?" Eleanor showed her the legal pad covered, with notes, the printed emails, the beginning of her daily documentation. Sophie's eyes widened as she processed the scope of Eleanor's investigation. "You're building a case. I'm protecting myself. I can help." Sophie's voice carried sudden excitement. "I mean, I know you're brilliant and everything, but I know technology. I can research elder law online, help you organize documentation. Digitally, maybe even find examples of other people who've fought this kind of thing successfully." Eleanor studied her granddaughter's face. At 17, Sophie had the kind of righteous anger that could move mountains, paired with skills Eleanor acknowledged she lacked. More importantly, she had someone who believed in her autonomy. "Are you prepared for this to put you in conflict with your parents?" Sophie's jaw set. "They put themselves in conflict with what's right. I'm choosing your side." Eleanor felt something shift inside her chest. The same crystallization as the night before, but warmer. "Then we'd better get to work." They spent the next 2 hours in focused collaboration. Sophie created digital files and backup systems for Eleanor's documentation, while Eleanor called Dr. Patricia Nolan's office to schedule an independent assessment. "Mrs. Hartwell?" Dr. Nolan's receptionist sounded surprised. "Your annual physical isn't until February. I need a comprehensive evaluation of my cognitive and physical capabilities," Eleanor said carefully. "For my own peace of mind." There was a pause. "Let me speak with the doctor. Can you hold?" Dr. Nolan came on the line herself. "Eleanor, is everything all right?" "My family has concerns about my competence," Eleanor said simply. "I'd like professional documentation of my actual capabilities." "I see." Dr. Nolan's voice carried understanding. "Can you come in Thursday morning? I'll block out extra time for a thorough evaluation." As Eleanor hung up, Sophie looked up from her laptop. "Grandma Eleanor, I found something interesting. There's a whole movement of older adults fighting for what they call aging in place. People who've successfully challenged family members trying to force them into institutional care." Eleanor leaned over to look at the screen. Stories of people who'd fought similar battles, legal precedents, support networks, evidence that she wasn't alone in this struggle. "Knowledge is power," she murmured, echoing something she'd told countless students over the years. "Exactly," Sophie said. "And now we have both knowledge and a plan." Eleanor looked at her granddaughter. This fierce young woman who'd chosen justice over family harmony, and felt hope kindle for the first time since she'd opened that terrible gift. They thought she was diminished, isolated, unable to fight back. They had no idea what they were up against. Eleanor looked at her granddaughter, this fierce young woman who'd chosen justice over family harmony, and felt hope kindle for the sigh. First time since she'd opened that terrible gift. They thought she was diminished, isolated, unable to fight back. They had no idea what they were up against. 2 days later, that confidence was tested when David's Honda pulled into her driveway. At precisely 10 in the morning, Eleanor watched from her study window as he and Rebecca sat in the car for several minutes. clearly steeling themselves for what they expected to be a difficult conversation. Rebecca emerged first, straightening her jacket with the kind of purposeful movement Eleanor recognized from her own pre-battle rituals. David followed, his shoulders already apologetic. Eleanor met them at the door before they could knock. "David, Rebecca, please, come in." They settled in the living room, Eleanor's domain, filled with books and photographs that spoke to a life fully lived. She'd chosen her chair deliberately, the wingback that had been Thomas's favorite, positioned to face the couch where her visitors would sit. Behind her, afternoon light streamed through windows that overlooked the garden she still tended. "Mom," David began, "we wanted to follow up on our conversation the other night. We think there might have been some miscommunication." Eleanor opened the folder she'd prepared and placed it on the coffee table between them. "Before we discuss miscommunication, perhaps you'd like to see this." Rebecca leaned forward, her marketing instincts immediately recognizing a presentation. The folder contained Eleanor's daily documentation from the past 3 days, printed emails revealing their surveillance, and legal information about elder rights that Sophie had helped her compile. "What is this?" Rebecca's voice carried wariness. "Evidence," Eleanor said simply. "Documentation of my cognitive and physical capabilities. Proof that I prepare my own meals, manage my finances, maintain my home, and engage socially with neighbors and community members. I've also included information about my legal rights regarding involuntary placement." David paled as he recognized his own laptop printouts among the papers. "Mom, you went through my life," Eleanor interrupted, her voice carrying classroom authority. "Documented my supposed failures, shared them with family members, made decisions about my future. I merely returned the courtesy." Rebecca's composure cracked slightly. "Eleanor, we weren't trying to— You documented a burned pot as evidence of cognitive decline. I've documented 3 days of successful meal preparation. You noted a missed appointment. I've included confirmation that I rescheduled it appropriately. You cataloged my supposed isolation while I have written testimony from 3 neighbors about our regular interactions." The room fell silent, except for the grandfather clock's steady tick. Eleanor watched her son and daughter-in-law process. The extent of her preparation, the reversal of their assumed positions. "We're not trying to hurt you," David said finally, his voice small. "We're scared, Mom. Scared of something happening to you. Scared of not being good enough caregivers. Scared of what happened to my mother." Rebecca's voice broke on the words. She pressed her hands to her face, and when she looked up, tears had destroyed her careful makeup. "I watched her disappear piece by piece. I watched her dignity erode because I was too young, too stupid, too overwhelmed to make the right decisions. She died in a place that smelled like disinfectant and defeat because I failed her." Eleanor felt her anger shift, not disappearing but making room for compassion. "Rebecca—" "No, you don't understand," Rebecca continued, her professional composure completely gone. "She begged me not to put her there. Begged me. And I told her it was temporary, that it was for her own good, that she'd adjust. She never did. It faded away. And now I see you forgetting appointments, burning pots, falling. And I won't, watch it happen again." Eleanor leaned forward. "What happened to your mother is not what's happening to me. How do I know that?" Rebecca's voice rose. "How do any of us know? You're hiding things, Eleanor. The falls, the confusion, the normal signs of aging that don't constitute incompetence," Eleanor finished. "Yes, I've had some memory lapses. Yes, I fell once on a wet step. Yes, I occasionally burn dinner when I'm distracted by a good book. These are not symptoms of dementia, Rebecca. They're symptoms of being 80 years old." David cleared his throat. "Mom, Jennifer is threatening to cut off the financial help if we don't handle this situation. Eleanor's eyebrows rose. Handle this situation? She says she can't keep supporting us financially if we're not going to take responsibility for your care, Rebecca admitted. She thinks we're being weak, that we should just make the decision for you. I see. Eleanor's voice carried dangerous quiet. So this urgency isn't entirely about my well-being. It's about Jennifer's ultimatum. The sound of hammering interrupted their conversation. Through the window, Eleanor could see Marcus Rivera on her front steps, toolbox open beside him, methodically replacing loose boards she'd mentioned weeks ago. He worked with quiet efficiency, occasionally glancing toward the house but not intruding. "Who is that?" Rebecca asked, following Eleanor's gaze. "My neighbor, Marcus Rivera. He's been helping with small repairs since Thomas died. Is he qualified? Licensed?" Rebecca's anxiety immediately transferred to this new concern. Eleanor smiled slightly. "He's a retired carpenter with 45 years of experience, more qualified than most contractors, and considerably more trustworthy." They watched Marcus work, his movements precise and unhurried. Eleanor realized his presence served as a visual rebuttal to their assumptions, proof that she had practical support, that she wasn't as isolated as they imagined. "Here's what's going to happen," Eleanor said, drawing their attention back to her. "I'm scheduling an independent assessment with Dr. Nolan to document my cognitive and physical capabilities. I'm consulting with a lawyer about my rights. And I'm establishing clear boundaries about my home and my decisions." "Mom," David started. "I'm not finished." Eleanor's voice carried the authority that had once silenced unruly lecture halls. "I understand your fears. I empathize with Rebecca's trauma regarding her mother, but I will not allow those fears to override my autonomy. If and when I need assistance, I will ask for it. Until then, decisions about my life remain mine to make." Rebecca sat back looking defeated. "What if you can't recognize when you need help? What if we wait too long?" "Then you deal with the consequences of respecting my dignity," Eleanor said quietly. "Just as I've dealt with the consequences of your choices, the violated trust, the assumption of incompetence, the infantilizing of a woman who raised 3 children and built a distinguished career." The hammering stopped. Through the window, they could see Marcus testing the stability of the repaired steps, his work complete but unhurried. He caught Eleanor's eye through the glass and nodded once, a simple acknowledgement that spoke of reliability and respect. "I'm not your mother, Rebecca," Eleanor said gently. "And you're not 17 and overwhelmed. We can find better solutions than fear-based ones." David looked between his mother and his wife, his face etched with the pain of divided loyalties. "What do you want from us, Mom?" "Time," Eleanor said. "Trust, and the courtesy of including me in decisions about my own life." Rebecca wiped her eyes, smearing mascara but looking somehow younger. "I don't know how to not be terrified." "We learn together," Eleanor replied. "But we learn with honesty, not surveillance, with cooperation, not coercion." The grandfather clock chimed 11 as Marcus's truck started in the driveway, leaving behind sturdy steps and the quiet assurance of practical support. Eleanor looked at her son and daughter-in-law, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time, not as adversaries, but as frightened people trying to express love in profoundly wrong ways. The war wasn't over. But perhaps, she thought, they could find their way to a more honorable peace. The grandfather clock chimed 11 as Marcus's truck started in the driveway, leaving behind sturdy steps and the quiet assurance of practical support. Eleanor looked at her son and daughter-in-law, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time, not as adversaries, but as frightened people trying to express love in profoundly wrong ways. The war wasn't over. But perhaps, she thought, they could find their way to a more honorable peace. 3 days later, Eleanor sat in Dr. Patricia Nolan's office, submitting to the most thorough medical examination she'd had in years. Marcus had offered to drive her, a gesture that surprised Eleanor. With its simple kindness, he waited now in the reception area, reading a dog-eared copy of Popular Mechanics with the same patient attention he brought to his repair work. "Your blood pressure is excellent," Dr. Nolan said, removing the cuff. "Heart rate steady, reflexes, appropriate for your age. Now, let's do some cognitive assessments." Eleanor had expected this part, had even prepared for it. But Dr. Nolan's approach was thorough without being condescending. Memory tests that challenged without insulting, problem-solving exercises that felt more like interesting puzzles than medical evaluations. "Draw a clock showing 3:15, Dr. Nolan instructed, sliding paper across the desk. Eleanor sketched the circle, placed the numbers with careful precision, drew the hands pointing to the correct positions. It struck her as almost absurdly simple, yet she knew families had been torn apart over failures to complete this exact task. "Excellent. Now, I'm going to give you 3 words to remember. Apple, penny, table. I'll ask you to repeat them back to me in a few minutes." They moved through balance tests, coordination exercises, more complex cognitive challenges. Eleanor found herself oddly engaged by the process, her competitive academic nature responding to the intellectual demands. "Apple, penny, table," she said when prompted, then added, "Though I'd like to know what the scoring criteria are for these assessments." Dr. Nolan smiled. "Spoken like a true professor. Eleanor, your cognitive function is well within normal ranges for your age. Yes, there are minor changes. Your processing speed is slightly slower than it would have been 20 years ago, and your short-term memory has some gaps that are entirely age-appropriate. But there's no indication of dementia or significant cognitive impairment." Eleanor felt something uncoil in her chest. "And the fall?" "Single incident on a wet surface. Your balance and coordination are good. I'd recommend some simple home safety modifications, better lighting, grab bars in the bathroom, but nothing that suggests you can't live independently." "What would you tell my family?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dr. Nolan leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "I'd tell them that aging involves changes, but changes aren't the same as incompetence. I'd also tell them that your right to make your own decisions doesn't disappear because you're 80. Eleanor emerged from the medical building feeling validated, but also strangely unsettled. Marcus rose from his chair in the waiting area, folding his magazine carefully. "How did it go?" he asked as they walked to his truck. "Well, better than expected." Eleanor paused, then added, "Marcus, would you mind if we made another stop? I'd like to see the place they want to send me." Sunset Manor occupied a converted Victorian mansion on the outskirts of Millbrook, surrounded by well-maintained gardens and additional wings that blended seamlessly with the original architecture. Eleanor had driven past it countless times, without really seeing it. Now, walking through the front entrance with Marcus beside her, she tried to view it with fresh eyes. Maria Santos met them in the lobby, a woman in her 40s with graying hair and eyes that held both kindness and professional competence. Eleanor had expected someone more institutional, less warm. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm so glad you decided to visit. Would you like me to show you around?" The tour revealed a facility that defied Eleanor's preconceptions. The rooms were spacious and bright, with residents' personal furniture and photographs creating individualized spaces. The common areas buzzed with genuine activity, not the forced cheer she'd imagined, but people engaged in pursuits that seemed to interest them. In the library, Eleanor met Margaret Chen, a former English teacher who'd moved to Sunset Manor after a stroke. "I fought the decision for months," Margaret admitted, her words slightly slurred but her mind clearly sharp. thought it meant giving up. But honestly, having meals prepared, maintenance handled, medical support available, it's freed me to focus on things I actually enjoy. They encountered Robert Martinez in the woodworking shop, creating intricate birdhouses with tools and space he couldn't have afforded in his apartment. "My daughter thought I'd hate it here," he said, sanding a delicate joint. "But I've got better equipment than I've had in years, and other people who actually care about craftsmanship." Eleanor found herself unexpectedly intrigued by the art studio, the computer center where residents Skyped with distant grandchildren, the small garden plots where people grew tomatoes and herbs. This wasn't the sterile, soul-crushing institution she'd imagined. "What's the hardest part?" she asked Maria as they concluded the tour. "Letting go of the illusion of complete independence," Maria said honestly. "Most of our residents struggle with that initially. But many find that accepting help in some areas actually increases their freedom in others." In Marcus's truck afterward, Eleanor sat quietly, processing what she'd seen. "It wasn't what I expected," she admitted finally. "Carmen and I toured a place like that," Marcus said, his voice careful. "After her diagnosis, she was terrified of losing herself, of becoming just another patient. But when her condition worsened, when I couldn't lift her safely anymore, when she needed medical attention I couldn't provide." He paused. "Sometimes love means accepting help, even when it's hard." "What happened?" "She decided to stay home, made me promise. So I learned about hospital beds and medications, hired home health aides, turned our bedroom into a mini medical facility." His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "She died in our house, in our bed, surrounded by things she loved. But Eleanor, there were days when I thought a good facility might have been kinder to both of us." Eleanor studied his profile, seeing the lines etched by caregiving, the weight of choices made and unmade. "Do you regret honoring her wishes?" "No, but I learned that there's no perfect choice when it comes to aging and illness. There are only choices that honor what matters most to the person living them." That evening, Eleanor sat in her study, Thomas's books surrounding her, trying to reconcile what she'd learned. Dr. Nolan's assessment confirmed her competence. Sunset Manor had challenged her assumptions about institutional care. Marcus's experience illustrated the complexity of caregiving decisions. Her family's fears weren't entirely unfounded. Aging did involve risks, changes, vulnerabilities, but their solutions were premature, paternalistic, and driven more by their anxieties than her actual needs. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Sophie's voice carried excitement and worry in equal measure. "Grandma Eleanor, how did the appointments go?" Eleanor found herself describing the day's revelations, the medical validation, the surprising appeal of aspects of assisted living, the complexity of Marcus's caregiving experience. As she spoke, she realized that her fight wasn't really against assisted living or her family's concerns. It was for the right to make her own informed decisions about her future, whatever those decisions might be. "So what now?" Sophie asked. Eleanor looked around her study, at the life she'd built, the independence she'd fought to preserve. "Now I decide what I actually want, not just what I'm fighting against." The path forward remained unclear, but for the first time since that devastating birthday dinner, Eleanor felt she was approaching it from a position of knowledge rather than reaction. And perhaps, she thought, that made all the difference. The path forward remained unclear, but for the first time since that devastating birthday dinner, Eleanor felt she was approaching it from a position of knowledge rather than reaction. And, perhaps, she thought, that made all the difference. Eleanor had just hung up with Sophie when she heard a car door slam in her driveway. Through the study window, she saw a figure she hadn't expected, Tommy, her youngest, climbing out of a battered Honda with the careful movements of someone monitoring their own stability. Even from a distance, she could read the signs: The slightly too thin frame, the cautious way he approached the house, the tension in his shoulders that spoke of ongoing struggle. She met him at the door before he could knock. At 35, Tommy still had traces of the charm that had gotten him through high school on a wing and a prayer, but addiction had carved lines around his eyes that made him look older than David. Mom. His voice carried exhaustion and something else. Anger, perhaps, or determination. We need to talk. Tommy. Eleanor stepped aside to let him in, noting the way he moved through her house, familiar, respectful, but alert. I wasn't expecting you. Jennifer called me. He settled into the living room chair furthest from Eleanor, a positioning she recognized from years of family gatherings where he'd maintained distance from potential conflict. She wanted to make sure I understood the situation and wouldn't interfere with necessary decisions. Eleanor felt a chill. I see. Do you? Because I don't think you see all of it. Tommy leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. Mom, they've been talking about this for months. Not just David and Rebecca, all of them. Even me, until I told Jennifer to go to hell. What exactly did Jennifer tell you? Tommy's laugh held no humor. That you're declining rapidly, that David and Rebecca are overwhelmed, that someone needs to make the hard decisions because you can't. She wanted to know if I'd support their plan to get you into assisted living. Eleanor studied her youngest son's face, seeing traces of the boy who'd brought home injured birds, who'd defended smaller children from bullies despite his own vulnerabilities. And what did you tell her? I told her she was full of shit. Tommy's language was blunt, unfiltered. I told her I've been checking on you regularly. Not spying, just visiting. And you're sharper than half the people I work with in recovery programs. Eleanor's eyebrows rose. You've been checking on me? Once a week, sometimes twice. I park down the street and watch you work in your garden, walk to the mailbox, see Marcus helping with repairs. I see you managing your life just fine. His voice carried a defensive edge. I know what decline looks like, Mom. I've lived it. This isn't it. The admission hit Eleanor unexpectedly. Her unreliable, struggling son had been quietly watching over her while the rest of her family documented her supposed failures. Tommy, why didn't you tell me you were— Because I'm the family screw-up, he interrupted. My opinion doesn't count. I'm the cautionary tale, the reason you need professional care. Because what if something happens and only irresponsible Tommy is around to help? Eleanor heard decades of pain in those words, the weight of being written off by his own family. Is that what they said? Among other things. Tommy stood abruptly, pacing to the window. But here's what I really came to tell you. This isn't just about your safety, Mom. It's about money. Money. Jennifer's been bankrolling David and Rebecca for years. Rebecca's marketing firm took a hit during the recession, never fully recovered. David's professor's salary doesn't cover much, so Big Sister swoops in with regular loans that everyone knows will never be repaid. Eleanor felt pieces clicking into place. David's reluctance to make waves, Rebecca's desperate anxiety, the urgency that seemed disproportionate to her actual condition. How much money, Tommy? Enough to matter. House payments, car loans, Sophie's college fund. They're financially dependent on Jennifer's generosity, and she's made it clear that generosity comes with expectations. The phone rang then as if summoned by their conversation. Eleanor recognized David's number and answered with a sense of foreboding. Mom, is Tommy there? David's voice carried unusual strain. His sponsor called. He missed a meeting and— I'm here, David. Tommy took the phone from Eleanor's hand. And I'm sober, and we need to have a family conversation. Now. An hour later, they sat in Eleanor's living room, the same arrangement as a few days earlier, but with Tommy's presence shifting the dynamic entirely. David perched on the edge of the couch. Rebecca looked pale and anxious, and Tommy occupied his usual distant chair with new authority. Jennifer's flying in tomorrow, Rebecca announced without preamble. She says we've let the situation drag on too long. Situation? Tommy's voice carried acid. You mean Mom's refusal to cooperate with your plan to warehouse her? Tommy, please, David began. No, David. You don't get to please me anymore. Tommy turned to Eleanor. Tell them about your medical evaluation, Mom. Tell them what Dr. Nolan actually said. Eleanor shared the results of her assessment, watching David's face crumple as the medical evidence contradicted months of family narrative. Rebecca listened in silence, her hands clenched in her lap. So she's fine, Tommy concluded. Competent, capable, managing her own life successfully. But you're still pushing assisted living. Why? The silence stretched until David finally broke. Because I'm scared, okay? I'm scared of making the wrong decision, scared of disappointing everyone, scared of not being good enough. His voice cracked. Jennifer and you, Tommy. You both know what you want. You succeed or fail on your own terms. I've spent my whole life trying to be good enough for everyone else. Rebecca reached for David's hand. And I'm terrified of being responsible for Eleanor's care because I failed so completely with my own mother. I made every wrong decision, waited too long, trusted. The wrong people, she died hating me. But mostly, Tommy said quietly, you're both scared of Jennifer cutting off the money if you don't do what she wants. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. David's face flushed red while Rebecca looked stricken. It's not that simple, Rebecca whispered. Isn't it? Tommy's voice was gentle now, understanding rather than accusatory. You're trapped between your sister's ultimatum and Mom's rights, between financial security and doing what's right. Eleanor looked around the room at her family. Her struggling youngest son who'd found clarity in his own battle with powerlessness. Her middle child paralyzed by lifelong feelings of inadequacy. Her daughter-in-law driven by unprocessed grief and financial desperation. For the first time, she saw the full landscape of pressures and fears that had led to that devastating birthday dinner. Jennifer controls all of you, Eleanor said quietly. Through money, through distance, through the assumption that her success gives her the right to make decisions for the rest of us. David nodded miserably. She says if we can't handle your care responsibly, she'll have to reconsider all the financial arrangements. Sophie's college fund, the house payments. So, you decided to handle me, Eleanor finished. Like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be consulted. Tommy leaned forward. Here's what I know about control, about powerlessness, about having other people make decisions about your life because they think they know better. It destroys you from the inside out. And Mom? He met Eleanor's eyes directly. You don't deserve that. You don't deserve to have your life decided by Jennifer's ultimatums or Rebecca's guilt or David's fear of disappointing people. Eleanor felt something shift in the room's emotional landscape. Her addicted son, the family failure, the one whose opinion supposedly didn't count, had articulated the central truth they'd all been dancing around. What do you suggest we do? She asked Tommy. We tell Jennifer to come see for herself what she's trying to destroy, Tommy said. We make her face the consequences of her financial manipulation, and we stop letting old family patterns determine new decisions. Eleanor looked around the room at 3 generations of damage and love, fear and hope, seeing clearly for the first time how money and old wounds had twisted their ability to care for each other honestly. The hardest conversations, she realized, were still ahead of them. The hardest conversations, Eleanor realized, were still ahead of them. Jennifer arrived the next afternoon in a rental car that looked like it had driven straight from the airport to Eleanor's driveway without pause for adjustment or reflection. Through the window, Eleanor watched her eldest daughter emerge with the kind of purposeful efficiency that had made her one of California's most respected cardiac surgeons. Even after a cross-country flight, Jennifer's tailored blazer showed. No wrinkles, Her silver hair remained perfectly styled, and her stride carried the confidence of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions under pressure. Eleanor met her at the door, noting how Jennifer's gaze immediately swept the interior of the house, cataloging, assessing, looking for evidence to support predetermined conclusions. "Mother." Jennifer's embrace was brief but genuine. "You look well." "I am well. Come in." David and Rebecca were already seated in the living room, having arrived early with the nervous energy of people preparing for surgery. Tommy occupied his usual distant chair, studying his older sister with the wary attention of someone who'd learned to read dangerous moods. Jennifer settled into the remaining chair with the kind of controlled precision Eleanor remembered from faculty meetings, claiming space, establishing authority, preparing to direct the conversation. "I flew out here to resolve this situation," Jennifer began without preamble. "I understand there's been some resistance to the assisted living arrangement." "There's been no resistance," Eleanor said quietly. "There's been a refusal to accept decisions made without my input or consent." Jennifer's eyebrows rose slightly. "Mother, we're trying to ensure your safety and well-being. Sometimes that requires making difficult decisions. We, your family, the people who love you and want what's best for you." Eleanor stood. "Then let me show you what's best for me. Let me show you my actual life, not the version of it you've constructed from secondhand reports." For the next 2 hours, Eleanor led Jennifer through her daily routine. They walked to the corner market where Eleanor knew the cashiers by name, to the library where she volunteered twice a week helping adults learn to read, to the community garden where she maintained a plot that fed both herself and 2 elderly neighbors. At each stop, people greeted Eleanor warmly, engaging her in conversations that demonstrated her social connections and mental acuity. Jennifer observed with the clinical detachment she brought to cardiac catheterizations, but Eleanor caught moments of surprise when Eleanor effortlessly calculated change without consulting a calculator, when she remembered complex details about her neighbor's grandchildren, when she efficiently navigated scheduling conflicts at the library. "Your mother's one of our most reliable volunteers," said Janet Mills, the library director. "Sharp as a tack and twice as organized as volunteers half her age." As they walked home, Jennifer was uncharacteristically quiet. Eleanor waited, recognizing the processing silence that had always preceded her daughter's most important observations. "The reports made it sound like you were declining more significantly," Jennifer said finally. "The reports were compiled by people looking for evidence of decline," Eleanor replied. "They found what they were looking for because they weren't looking for anything else." They arrived home to find Marcus on the front porch, replacing a loose section of railing. Jennifer's professional eye immediately assessed his work. Competent, thorough, clearly experienced. "Jennifer, this is Marcus Rivera, my neighbor." "Marcus, my daughter Jennifer." Marcus wiped his hands on a rag before extending one to Jennifer. "Dr. Morrison, your mother speaks of you often." Jennifer's handshake was firm, her assessment automatic. "You do repairs for her?" "Small things. Whatever needs attention." Marcus's voice carried no defensiveness, simply statement of fact. "Been keeping an eye on the place since Thomas passed." "Are you licensed? Insured?" Eleanor felt irritation, flare, but Marcus smiled slightly. 45 years in carpentry, ma'am. Retired union. Your mother's house gets the same attention I gave my own." Jennifer nodded, filing information, recalculating assumptions. Eleanor realized her daughter was seeing, perhaps for the first time, that Eleanor had developed practical support systems that worked. That evening, the family gathered again in Eleanor's living room. The dynamic had shifted subtly. Jennifer's certainty seemed less absolute, her siblings less defensive. Sophie arrived directly from school, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her face set with determination that reminded Eleanor powerfully of Jennifer at that age. Before we discuss next steps, Sophie said, claiming space in the conversation with startling authority, I have some things I need to say to Aunt Jennifer. Jennifer turned toward her niece, eyebrows raised. Sophie, no, you don't get to dismiss me. Sophie's voice carried steel beneath its youthful timbre. I'm 17, not 7. I understand what's happening here, and I understand that role money plays in it. The room went silent. Eleanor felt pride and concern warring in her chest as she watched her granddaughter prepare to challenge the family's power structure. You've been financially supporting my parents for years, Sophie continued, and now you're using that support as leverage to force decisions about Grandma Eleanor's life. That's not love, Aunt Jennifer. That's control. Jennifer's composure cracked slightly. Sophie, you don't understand the complexities. I understand that you live 3,000 miles away and think that gives you the right to make decisions about someone's daily existence. I understand that my parents are terrified of losing your financial support, so they're willing to violate Grandma Eleanor's autonomy to keep you happy. Sophie's voice rose slightly. And I understand that none of this is actually about Grandma Eleanor's well-being. It's about your need to manage and control everything, even from across the country. Jennifer stood abruptly, pacing to the window. When she turned back, her surgical composure had been replaced by something more raw, more vulnerable. Do you know what I see every day? Jennifer's voice was quiet, but intense. I see people who waited too long to make hard decisions. I see families destroyed by denial, by wishful thinking, by the inability to face reality. I cut open chests to repair hearts that might have been saved if someone had acted sooner, made harder choices, been willing to override patient preferences for patient safety. Eleanor heard the pain beneath her daughter's professional authority, the weight of responsibility that came with life and death decision-making. I'm terrified, Jennifer continued, her voice breaking slightly, of being the daughter who let her mother suffer because I was too far away to see clearly, too sentimental to make necessary decisions. I'm terrified of getting the call that something happened, something I could have prevented if I'd just been stronger, more decisive. The room fell silent except for the grandfather clock's steady tick. Eleanor saw her daughter clearly for perhaps the first time, not as the controlling eldest child, but as a woman whose professional life had taught her that love sometimes required overriding people's wishes, that safety sometimes demanded sacrificing autonomy. Jennifer, Eleanor said gently, your patients are dying. I'm not. Jennifer's face crumpled slightly. How do I know that? How do I know when I'm 3,000 miles away, when I see you maybe twice a year, when all I have are reports from David and Rebecca who are overwhelmed and scared? Tommy spoke for the first time since Jennifer's arrival. You trust her? He said simply. You trust Mom to know her own condition, to ask for help when she needs it, to make decisions about her own life. That's what love looks like when you can't control the outcome. Eleanor looked around the room at her family, her successful daughter grappling with the limits of professional expertise, her struggling son offering wisdom earned through powerlessness, her frightened middle child and daughter-in-law caught between competing loyalties, her fierce granddaughter fighting for principles that mattered more than family harmony. For the first time since that devastating birthday dinner, Eleanor sensed the possibility of understanding, if not agreement. The conversation that would determine her future was finally beginning in earnest. For the first time since that devastating birthday dinner, Eleanor sensed the possibility of understanding, if not agreement. The conversation that would determine her future was finally beginning in earnest. The storm arrived 2 days later, with the kind of November fury that reminded Millbrook residents why they kept flashlights and battery-powered radios close at hand. Eleanor had always found something invigorating about severe weather, the way it stripped away pretense and forced attention to fundamentals. She stood at her kitchen window, watching branches whip against the glass, feeling oddly peaceful despite the chaos outside. Jennifer had extended her stay, ostensibly to observe the situation, but actually, Eleanor suspected, to process what she'd seen during their tour of Millbrook. The controlled surgeon was struggling with evidence that contradicted her assumptions, and Eleanor recognized the intellectual honesty that made Jennifer good at her profession, working against her need for simple solutions. The power went out at 7:30, plunging the house into the kind of darkness that made familiar spaces suddenly foreign. Eleanor moved carefully through the kitchen, muscle memory guiding her toward the flashlight drawer. She'd done this. Dozens of times over 40 years in the house, could navigate every obstacle with her eyes closed. What she hadn't counted on was the new throw rug Rebecca had insisted on placing in the hallway, a safer replacement for the Persian runner that had supposedly caused Eleanor's previous fall. The unfamiliar texture caught her slipper as she turned toward the stairs, sending her stumbling sideways into the hall table. Eleanor felt herself falling, her wrist taking the impact as she tried to break her fall. Pain shot up her arm, sharp and immediate. She lay on the floor for a moment, trying to assess the damage. But something felt wrong. Not just her wrist, but her thinking. The familiar hallway seemed foreign, the darkness more complete than it should be. For the first time in months, Eleanor felt genuinely frightened. She managed to sit up, cradling her wrist, trying to orient herself in the blackness. Where was her flashlight? Had she been going upstairs or downstairs? The questions felt important, but somehow elusive, as if they belonged to someone else. Marcus's knock came exactly 15 minutes later. Their established check-in system during severe weather, a routine they'd developed without formal discussion. When Eleanor didn't answer immediately, she heard his key in the lock, the spare. She'd given him after he'd helped her carry groceries during a blizzard the previous winter. "Eleanor, power's out at my place too, just checking." His flashlight beam found her sitting on the hallway floor, and his tone immediately shifted to calm urgency. "What happened?" "I fell," Eleanor said, surprised by how thin her voice sounded. "My wrist, I think and I feel confused. Everything seems—" She gestured vaguely with her good hand. Marcus was beside her immediately, his flashlight providing steady illumination while he examined her wrist with gentle competence. "Can you move your fingers?" "Good. Wrist is swollen but probably not broken. Eleanor, do you know what day it is?" The question struck Eleanor as oddly difficult. Thursday? Friday? The storm had disrupted her usual routines, and the disorientation from the fall made thinking feel like walking through fog. "I'm not sure," she admitted, hating the admission, but recognizing the importance of honesty. Marcus's phone was already in his hand. "Sophie? It's Marcus Rivera. Your grandmother had a fall, needs medical attention. Can you coordinate with your parents while I get her to the hospital?" Eleanor marveled at the efficiency of it. No panic, no wasted motion, just practical problem-solving. Within minutes, Marcus had helped her to his truck, wrapped her wrist in an improvised ice pack, and was driving carefully through the storm-darkened streets toward Millbrook General. Sophie's coordination proved equally impressive. By the time they reached the emergency room, she had contacted both her parents and Dr. Nolan, researched the hospital's current wait times, and even arranged for a neighbor to check on Marcus's house during the power outage. Dr. Nolan met them in the emergency department, having driven through the storm when she learned Eleanor was coming in. "Let's get that wrist x-rayed and do a quick neuro check," she said, her professional calm reassuring in the bright hospital lighting. David and Rebecca arrived as Eleanor was being examined, their faces reflecting different kinds of fear. David looked genuinely worried about his mother's well-being. Rebecca looked grimly vindicated, as if Eleanor's fall confirmed every prediction she'd made about the dangers of independent living. Jennifer appeared 20 minutes later, having driven from her hotel through the worst of the storm. She moved through the emergency department with the authority of someone who belonged in medical settings, immediately seeking updates from staff who recognized her professional status. Sprained wrist, minor bruising, Temporary disorientation consistent with a mild concussion, Dr. Nolan reported to the assembled family. All normal responses to a fall. The confusion was probably from the head bump combined with disorientation, from the power outage. Eleanor sat on the examination table, feeling more herself with each passing minute as the hospital's bright lights and familiar medical routines restored her sense of orientation. The fog that had clouded her thinking. Immediately after the fall was lifting, leaving her embarrassed by her temporary vulnerability, but clear about what had happened. "This is exactly what we were afraid of," Rebecca said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Eleanor, what if Marcus hadn't come to check on you? What if you'd been seriously injured, lying there alone in the dark?" "But I wasn't alone," Eleanor replied quietly. "Marcus came because we have an arrangement. Sophie coordinated the response because we're connected. Dr. Nolan was here because she cares about her patients. The system worked, Rebecca." Jennifer studied Eleanor with clinical attention. "Your thinking seems clear now." "It is. The confusion was temporary, related to the fall. Dr. Nolan can explain the medical details, but I'm not experiencing cognitive decline, Jennifer. I experienced a trauma response that resolved with appropriate treatment." Marcus spoke from his position near the door. In assisted living, Eleanor would have fallen just the same. The difference would be that strangers would have found her, instead of people who know her routines, care about her specifically, and can respond to her individual needs. Rebecca turned on him with surprising intensity. Strangers who are medically trained, who have emergency protocols, who are prepared for exactly these situations. Strangers who see her as one of many patients rather than as Eleanor specifically, Sophie countered. She looked up from her phone, where she'd been researching fall protocols. "Grandma Eleanor, how long did it take Marcus to find you?" 15 minutes, maybe less. Average response time for emergency calls in assisted living facilities is 12 to 20 minutes, Sophie read from her screen. Your community support system performed within the same parameters as professional care, but with people who actually know you. Eleanor watched her family process this information, seeing different conclusions forming on different faces. The crisis had tested everyone's assumptions, but it hadn't provided the clear vindication any of them had expected. "The fall happened," Eleanor said quietly. "I was temporarily vulnerable, but the support system worked. I was found quickly, treated appropriately, and I'm recovering well. This incident doesn't prove I need institutional care. It proves I need to be more careful about throw rugs." Dr. Nolan smiled slightly. "And maybe keep a flashlight in every room." But Eleanor's right. This was an accident with appropriate response and good outcomes. It's not evidence of incompetence or need for institutional care. As they prepared to leave the hospital, Eleanor realized the crisis had clarified something important. Safety wasn't about eliminating all risk. It was about having appropriate support when risks materialized. And tonight, that support had come not from institutional protocols, but from genuine relationships built on care and mutual respect. The storm was breaking as they walked to the parking lot, revealing stars between dissipating clouds. Eleanor felt her family's dynamics shifting around her, old assumptions cracking under the weight of actual experience rather than imagined fears. The real conversation about her future, she realized, could finally begin. The real conversation about her future, Eleanor realized, could finally begin. But first, it would have to wait. Eleanor's phone rang at 6:30 the next morning, jarring her from the deep sleep that had finally come after the previous night's hospital visit. Her wrist throbbed in its brace as she reached for the receiver, and for a moment she felt every one of her 80 years. The early morning light filtering through her bedroom curtains seemed harsh, unforgiving, highlighting the reality of her limitations in ways that daylight usually didn't. "Mom?" Tommy's voice carried a particular quality she'd learned to recognize over the years, the controlled desperation of someone fighting not to fall apart completely. There was a tremor beneath his words, the kind of barely contained panic that preceded either breakthrough or breakdown. "I'm sorry to call so early, but I didn't know who else." Eleanor sat up fully, immediately alert despite her physical discomfort. 20 years of Tommy's addiction had taught her to read the subtle variations in his voice, to distinguish between the calls that meant he was thinking about using and the calls that meant he already had. This was definitely the latter. "Tommy, what's wrong?" "I used last night." The words came out in a rush, shame and fear tangled together. "After Jennifer's visit, after everything with your fall, after watching the whole family tear itself apart over your situation, I just couldn't handle it. I went to that bar on Fletcher Street, the one I always said I'd never go back to. I drank until they cut me off, then I bought a bottle and finished it in the parking lot." Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the familiar combination of disappointment and protective love that Tommy's relapses always triggered. But this time, something was different. Instead of the helpless frustration she usually felt, she found herself thinking clearly, strategically, as if Tommy's crisis were an academic problem requiring systematic analysis and solution. "Where are you now?" "Back at the halfway house. I came back around 3 this morning, told them what happened. They're talking about kicking me out, and my sponsor won't even take my calls, and I don't know what to do." His voice cracked on the last words. "I called David first, but he didn't answer. And Rebecca, well, you know how Rebecca feels about my relapses. She's never said it outright, but I can tell she thinks I'm hopeless." Eleanor was already moving, phone cradled against her shoulder as she reached for clothes with her good hand. The motion sent a sharp pain through her injured wrist, but she pushed through it, her mind focused on the immediate problem rather than her own discomfort. "Tommy, listen to me carefully. Where exactly are you right now?" "In my room at Millbrook Recovery House on Oak Street. Mom, I'm scared. If they kick me out, I don't have anywhere to go. I can't afford my own place, and I know I can't stay clean without structure. Last night proved that. But I also can't keep disappointing everyone. Can't keep being the family. Screw up who?" "Tommy." Eleanor's voice carried the authority that had once calmed panicked graduate students facing comprehensive exams. "Stop spiraling. I'm coming to get you. Don't make any decisions, don't sign any papers, don't agree to anything until I get there. Do you understand?" "Mom, you just got out of the hospital. Your wrist will be fine. 20 minutes, Eleanor said, already calculating the fastest route to Oak Street despite her injured dominant hand. "And Tommy? This isn't the end of the world. We'll figure it out." Eleanor had never been inside a halfway house, but she'd spent enough years navigating institutional bureaucracies, university administrations, hospital systems, insurance companies, to recognize the dynamics immediately. The building itself was a converted Victorian not unlike her own house, but institutional efficiency had stripped away most of its original character. Fluorescent lighting replaced chandeliers, industrial carpeting covered what had probably once been beautiful hardwood floors, and the smell of industrial cleaning products couldn't quite mask the underlying odors of too many people living in too little space. The director, a tired-looking woman named Carol Martinez, had clearly had this conversation many times before. Her desk was organized for maximum efficiency, covered with forms and folders that suggested a constant flow of crises requiring documentation. Her manner was professional but weary, the exhaustion of someone who'd seen too many people fail despite her best efforts. "Mrs. Hartwell, I understand you're Tommy's mother, but our policies are very clear about this situation. Residents who use substances face immediate review for program termination. We can't make exceptions without undermining the entire structure that keeps other residents safe and sober." Eleanor settled into the chair across from Carol's desk, taking time to arrange herself with dignity despite her hospital bracelet and wrist brace. She'd learned long ago that how you presented yourself in institutional settings often determined how you were treated, and she intended to be treated as Tommy's advocate, not as a desperate mother begging for mercy. "I'm not asking for exceptions," Eleanor said carefully. "I'm asking for clarity about your procedures and Tommy's options. I assume you have protocols for situations like this. People don't become addicts and then achieve perfect sobriety without any setbacks. What are Tommy's choices?" Tommy sat beside her, looking younger than his 35 years, shame radiating from his hunched shoulders and downcast eyes. Eleanor resisted the urge to reach for his hand, recognizing that he needed to maintain what dignity he could in this setting. But she positioned herself slightly forward in her chair, a subtle signal that she was there as his supporter, not his supervisor. Carol consulted Tommy's file, flipping through pages that chronicled his 4 months at the facility. "He's been doing exceptionally well until yesterday," she admitted. "Perfect attendance at meetings, good relationships with other residents, steady progress in his job search. But our guidelines state that any substance use results in either immediate discharge or entry into our intensive 30-day program, depending on circumstances." "What circumstances determine which option applies?" Eleanor asked, pulling out a small notebook with her left hand. The motion sent a twinge through her injured wrist, but she ignored it, focusing on taking notes despite the awkwardness of writing with her non-dominant hand. "Family support, demonstrated commitment to recovery, willingness to accept additional restrictions and monitoring, and financial ability to cover the program costs." Eleanor looked at Tommy, seeing him not as the family disappointment or cautionary tale, but as her youngest son fighting a disease that had nearly destroyed him multiple times. She saw the boy who'd brought home injured birds, who'd defended smaller children from bullies despite his own vulnerabilities, who'd always felt everything more deeply than was comfortable for him or anyone around him. What would the intensive program involve specifically? Over the next hour, Eleanor asked detailed questions about treatment protocols, success rates, costs, insurance coverage, and expectations. She took notes methodically, her left-handed writing cramped but legible, treating Tommy's situation with the same systematic analysis she'd once brought to complex literary texts. Tommy watched in amazement as his mother navigated institutional systems he'd learned to approach only with resigned acceptance of failure. The program requires daily individual therapy sessions, twice daily group meetings, mandatory drug testing, restricted privileges for the first 2 weeks, and a structured job search program, Carol explained. Residents are required to contribute 4 hours daily to facility maintenance and operations. Phone calls and visitors are limited and monitored. "Success rates?" Eleanor asked. 73% of participants complete the program. Of those, 48% maintain sobriety for at least 6 months post-completion. Eleanor did quick mental calculations. Better than 50-50 odds for someone who completes the program and maintains the disciplines afterward. Significantly better than alternatives, Carol agreed. But the program costs $3,000 for 30 days. Insurance might cover part of it, but there's usually a significant out-of-pocket expense, often $1,500 to $2,000. Eleanor nodded, already calculating her savings account, her monthly expenses, what she could afford without compromising her essential independence. She had the money. Thomas's life insurance and their careful retirement planning had left her financially secure, if not wealthy. The question was whether spending it on Tommy's treatment would provide Jennifer with ammunition for her argument about Eleanor's declining judgment. But looking at her son's face, seeing the hope beginning to compete with shame in his expression, Eleanor realized that this decision represented exactly the kind of choice she'd been fighting for the right to make. If she couldn't spend her own money supporting her children's medical needs, then financial independence was meaningless. When would he start if we decide to proceed? If we approve his entry, immediately. Today. He'd move to the intensive wing, begin the program this afternoon. Eleanor turned to Tommy, seeing him clearly for the first time in years, not through the lens of his addiction or the family's disappointment, but as an adult human being capable of making decisions about his own recovery. "Tommy, what do you want to do?" The question seemed to surprise him. He looked up from his hands, meeting her eyes directly for the first time since she'd arrived. What do you mean? Do you want to do the intensive program? Do you believe it will help you? Are you committed to accepting the additional restrictions and requirements?" Eleanor's voice was matter-of-fact, treating him as an adult capable of making informed decisions about his own treatment. Tommy straightened slightly in his chair. "Yes. I think so. I was doing really well here, and yesterday it wasn't about wanting to use Mom. It was about fear. Fear that the family was falling apart, that you were going to lose your independence, that everyone was making decisions based on panic instead of reality. If I can get more support, more structure to help me deal with those feelings without drinking, I think I can get back on track." Eleanor studied his face, seeing sincerity rather than manipulation, genuine commitment rather than desperate promises. "Then let's discuss the paperwork." The next hour involved forms, insurance calls, and financial arrangements. Eleanor found herself automatically taking charge of the process, her years of managing household bureaucracy and university administration serving her well. She negotiated payment schedules, clarified insurance coverage, and arranged for immediate entry into the program, all while Tommy sat beside her looking stunned by the efficiency of it all. When they finally emerged from the halfway house, Tommy enrolled in the intensive program, and Eleanor, having written a check that would require careful budgeting but wouldn't compromise her essential independence, Tommy stopped walking and turned to face his mother. "Mom, I can't believe you just did that. The money, the time, dealing with all those forms and insurance people, you made it look easy." "Why can't you believe it?" Eleanor asked, genuinely curious about his surprise. Tommy was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with how to articulate something painful. "Because I'm the family screw-up," he said finally. "Because everyone else has written me off as a lost cause. Because when I've needed help before, it always came with lectures about how I'd brought it on myself and needed to face the natural consequences of my choices. Because Jennifer thinks I'm a waste of resources, David's too scared of conflict to advocate for me, and Rebecca sees me as proof that some people can't be saved." Eleanor felt a sharp pain that had nothing to do with her injured wrist. "Tommy, do you think I should be in assisted living?" The question clearly surprised him. "What? No, of course not. You're completely capable of managing your own life. You just proved that by handling my crisis better than anyone else in the family could have." "But I had a fall yesterday. I was confused and needed help." "That was an accident, not a pattern of incompetence. One incident doesn't erase 80 years of demonstrated capability." Eleanor smiled slightly, feeling pieces of understanding click into place. "And your relapse yesterday?" Tommy's eyes widened as he grasped the parallel she was drawing. "An incident, not evidence that I can't recover. Not proof that I'm fundamentally broken or incapable of getting well." "Exactly. We both deserve support that honors our dignity and respects our capability to make decisions about our own lives." Eleanor unlocked her car with her good hand, wincing slightly at the movement. "The family has been so focused on protecting both of us from the consequences of our choices that they've forgotten to trust us with our own recovery processes." They drove in comfortable silence until Tommy spoke again, his voice thoughtful rather than anxious. "Mom, everyone's going to be furious that you spent that money without consulting them, especially Jennifer. She's going to say it proves you can't make sound financial decisions." "It's my money, Tommy. Just as your recovery is your responsibility and you're right. Neither of us needs permission from family members to make appropriate decisions about our own lives and well-being." Eleanor's phone was ringing when they reached her house. David's number showed on the caller ID, and his voice carried the particular panic that meant someone had shared incomplete information with him. "Mom, Tommy's halfway house called looking for you. They said there was some kind of crisis and that Carol Martinez mentioned you'd been there for several hours. What's going on? Are you all right? Should Rebecca and I come over?" "Tommy had a setback," Eleanor said calmly, settling into her kitchen chair, while Tommy made tea with the natural domesticity that had always surprised people who only knew him through his addiction. "We've addressed it. He's enrolled in their intensive program and will be getting additional support for the next 30 days. "What? Mom, you can't just— We should have discussed this as a family. Tommy's treatment affects all of us, and spending that kind of money—" "David," Eleanor interrupted, her voice carrying gentle but unmistakable authority. "Yesterday, you and Rebecca and Jennifer were ready to make decisions about where I would live, what kind of care I would receive, and how my daily life would be structured, all without consulting me. Today I made a decision about Tommy's medical treatment without consulting you. Do you see the parallel?" Silence on the other end of the line. Then David's voice, smaller and more uncertain. "You handled his crisis yourself." "Yes. While recovering from your own fall, with an injured wrist." "Yes." Another pause, longer this time. "Mom, we keep treating you like you can't handle complex situations, but you just navigated addiction treatment bureaucracy more effectively than any of us have managed to do in 20 years of Tommy's disease." Eleanor looked at Tommy, who was listening to her side of the conversation with growing amazement and something that looked like pride. "Your brother and sister see my aging as evidence of incompetence, Tommy, but they see your addiction the same way. Both assumptions are wrong and destructive." Rebecca arrived 20 minutes later, having driven straight from her marketing firm when David called her. She burst through Eleanor's front door with the kind of frantic energy that suggested she'd been imagining worst-case scenarios during the entire drive across town. "Eleanor, what were you thinking? You just spent thousands of dollars on Tommy's treatment without consulting anyone. What if this affects your own financial security? What if you need that money for your own care? What if—" Rebecca stopped mid-sentence as she took in the scene. Eleanor calmly preparing lunch with her good hand, Tommy setting the table looking more stable and purposeful than he had in months, both of them radiating quiet competence rather than crisis. "What if what, Rebecca?" Eleanor asked, setting a plate of sandwiches on the table with steady hands despite her wrist brace. "What? If you can't afford your own care because you've spent money on Tommy's problems?" Eleanor poured iced tea, her movements deliberate and controlled. "Tommy's recovery isn't a problem, Rebecca. It's a medical treatment that required financial investment, just like my fall required medical attention last night. Both situations required competent adult decision-making, which is what happened." Tommy looked up at Rebecca, his voice quiet but clear. "She handled everything, Rebecca. Insurance paperwork, treatment protocols, financial arrangements, advocacy with the medical staff. More efficiently than I've ever managed to do myself, and definitely more effectively than the family's previous attempts to help me by controlling my choices." Rebecca sank into a chair, looking suddenly exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. "I don't understand. We've been so worried about Eleanor managing complex decisions, but she just managed one of the most complex situations our family faces. Because you've been looking for evidence of decline instead of evidence of competence," Eleanor said gently. "The same way you've been looking for evidence that Tommy can't recover instead of supporting his efforts to get well." Jennifer called that evening, having heard about the day's events from David. Eleanor answered the phone while Tommy sat nearby finishing his dinner before returning to the halfway house. Both of them braced for the conversation they knew was coming. "Mother, I understand you've made some significant financial commitments today without family consultation." Jennifer's voice carried the controlled precision that meant she was working to manage her own emotions. I made appropriate decisions about supporting my son's medical treatment, Eleanor replied, matching Jennifer's professional tone. Just as I expect to make appropriate decisions about my own care when and if the need arises. But what if your judgment is compromised by your emotional investment in Tommy's situation? What if, Jennifer, Eleanor interrupted, today I successfully advocated for Tommy with medical professionals, navigated complex insurance requirements, arranged payment for treatment, evaluated program success rates, and provided emotional support during a crisis. If my judgment were significantly impaired, would I have been capable of managing all of that effectively? A long pause. Eleanor could almost hear her eldest daughter's analytical mind working through the implications. No, Jennifer admitted finally. You wouldn't have been. Both Tommy and I deserve the right to make decisions about our own lives, with support, but not control from family members. Both of us deserve to be treated as competent adults, capable of managing our respective challenges with appropriate help when we need it. Tommy leaned forward, addressing the phone even though Jennifer couldn't see him. Jennifer, Mom didn't just help me today. She showed me what recovery with dignity looks like, what it means to be supported without being diminished, trusted, without being abandoned. Eleanor heard something shift in Jennifer's voice when she responded, a softening that suggested genuine reconsideration rather than strategic retreat. I'm beginning to understand that our approach to both of your situations might have been counterproductive. Not counterproductive, Eleanor corrected gently. Well-intentioned, but misdirected. You've been trying to protect us from the consequences of our own decisions instead of supporting us through them. There's a difference between helping someone and controlling them, between safety and autonomy. That night, as Tommy prepared to return to the halfway house for his intensive program, he hugged Eleanor carefully, mindful of her injured wrist, but holding her with genuine warmth for the first time in years. Thank you, Mom. Not just for today, but for treating me like someone worth saving. For believing I could recover instead of just managing my disease. Eleanor looked at her youngest son, still fragile, still fighting demons that might never fully release their grip, but standing straighter than he had in years. You are worth saving, Tommy, and you're worth trusting with your own recovery, even when that trust feels risky. As she watched him drive away, Eleanor realized that the day had demonstrated something crucial to her family. Her competence wasn't diminished by age any more than Tommy's potential was destroyed by addiction. Both of them deserved support that honored their dignity rather than control that diminished their agency. The conversation about her future could now proceed from a position of demonstrated strength rather than assumed vulnerability. And perhaps, she thought, washing the dishes with careful attention to her injured wrist, that would make all the difference. The conversation about her future could now proceed from a position of demonstrated strength rather than assumed vulnerability. And perhaps, she thought, washing the dishes with careful attention to her injured wrist, that would make all the difference. 3 days later, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, sketching out what she'd begun thinking of as her independence preservation plan. The morning light streamed through windows she'd washed herself the day before, illuminating pages covered with her careful handwriting. Tommy's successful entry into intensive treatment hadn't just demonstrated her competence, it had shifted something fundamental in the family dynamic, creating space for genuine negotiation rather than ultimatums. The doorbell interrupted her planning. Through the front window, she saw Maria Santos standing on her porch, looking professional, but somehow more approachable than she had during the Sunset Manor tour. Mrs. Hartwell, I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced. I've been thinking about our conversation, and I wondered if we might discuss some alternatives to traditional assisted living. Eleanor invited her in, curious about what had prompted this visit. Maria accepted coffee and settled into the living room chair that had become the informal negotiation seat during recent family conferences. I've been working in elder care for 15 years, Maria began. And I've learned that the best solutions are usually the ones people design for themselves, with professional support rather than professional control. Your family's situation has me thinking about some creative approaches we've tried with other families. Eleanor leaned forward, intrigued. What kind of approaches? Aging in place with graduated support systems. The idea is to create safety, nets that activate only when needed, preserving independence while addressing legitimate concerns about isolation and medical emergencies. Over the next hour, Maria outlined programs she'd seen work successfully. Home-based support services that could be scaled up or down based on changing needs, medical monitoring systems that provided peace of mind without surveillance, community connections that created natural check-in systems. Nothing she described required giving up Eleanor's home or autonomy. The key, Maria explained, is having a plan in place before you need it, so decisions can be made thoughtfully rather than in crisis mode. Eleanor found herself taking notes, her academic mind engaging with the possibilities. How would something like this work practically? That would depend on your specific situation, your family's concerns, and your own priorities. But typically, we start with an assessment of current capabilities and potential vulnerabilities, then design supports that address the gaps without creating unnecessary dependencies. Eleanor looked around her living room, seeing it with new eyes. Instead of a space her family wanted to remove her from, she began envisioning it as the center of a carefully designed support system, one she would help create and control. Would you be willing to work with me on developing something like this? Eleanor asked. Maria smiled. I'd be honored, but I'd recommend including your family in the planning process. The best solutions are ones everyone can live with. 2. Days later, Eleanor convened what she privately thought of as the first official meeting of her Independence Planning Committee. The group gathered in Dr. Nolan's office, neutral territory that signaled the medical legitimacy of their discussions. Eleanor had specifically chosen the participants, Dr. Nolan for medical expertise, Maria Santos for institutional knowledge, Marcus for practical support perspective, and Sophie for technological innovation. She deliberately excluded David, Rebecca, and Jennifer from this initial meeting, wanting to develop a solid proposal before family emotions complicated the process. I've asked you all here, Eleanor began, settling into her chair with the yellow legal pad that had become her planning tool, because I want to design a living arrangement that honors both my independence and my family's legitimate concerns. About my safety, I need your expertise to make this work. Dr. Nolan leaned forward, her professional interest clearly engaged. What kind of arrangement are you envisioning? Eleanor consulted her notes. Something Maria calls graduated independence, support systems that can be activated as needed without requiring me to give up my home or decision-making authority. I want to stay in my house, but I'm willing to accept reasonable safety measures and support services. Marcus, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. What would that look like practically? Eleanor turned to Maria, who had clearly given this considerable thought. We start with Eleanor's current capabilities and build supports around areas of potential concern. Medical monitoring, emergency response, household maintenance, social connections, but all structured to support her independence rather than replace it. Sophie, who had been taking notes on her laptop, looked up with excitement. This is like designing a smart home system, but for aging instead of convenience. Over the next 2 hours, they outlined a comprehensive plan. Dr. Nolan would coordinate with specialists to create a medical care protocol that included regular monitoring, medication management, and clear criteria for when additional intervention might be needed. Maria would help coordinate home-based services, housekeeping, meal preparation, transportation, that could be scaled up or down based on Eleanor's needs and preferences. Marcus offered to formalize his current role, creating what Maria called a chosen family support system. I'm already checking on Eleanor regularly, helping with repairs and maintenance, he said. If the family would feel better with more structure, I'm willing to commit to specific schedules and responsibilities. Sophie's contribution excited Eleanor most. I can design a monitoring system that provides information without feeling invasive, Sophie explained, her fingers flying over her laptop keyboard. Sensors that track daily routines without recording personal information, emergency alert systems, medication reminders, all connected to an app that family members can access for peace of mind. Eleanor watched her granddaughter's enthusiasm and felt a surge of hope. Instead of being managed by systems designed by others, she was helping design systems that would support her own choices. How do we address the family's financial concerns? Eleanor asked. Jennifer's worried that I'll spend money inappropriately or won't be able to afford necessary care. Maria had clearly anticipated this question. We create financial oversight that respects your autonomy. Maybe a trusted family member or professional who reviews major expenditures, not to control them, but to provide consultation and documentation that you're making informed decisions. Dr. Nolan added, and we establish clear medical criteria for when more intensive intervention might be necessary. Not arbitrary family anxiety, but objective measures of cognitive or physical decline that would indicate a need for different supports. Eleanor felt pieces clicking into place, a solution emerging that honored both her independence and her family's concerns. How do we present this to David, Rebecca, and Jennifer in a way that doesn't feel like I'm rejecting their input? You're not rejecting their input, Marcus said quietly. You're taking control of the planning process instead of being the subject of it. There's a difference. Sophie looked up from her laptop. Plus, this way you're addressing their concerns proactively, instead of just saying no to their solutions. Eleanor realized her granddaughter had identified something crucial: the difference between reactive resistance and proactive problem-solving. She wasn't just fighting her family's plan anymore. She was offering a better alternative. The following week, Eleanor hosted what she announced as a family planning meeting in her living room. She'd prepared carefully, arranging chairs to create a collaborative circle rather than the confrontational setup of previous meetings. The yellow legal pad had been replaced by a formal presentation folder, and she'd asked Sophie to prepare a visual presentation of their proposed monitoring system. David and Rebecca arrived first, looking wary but hopeful. Jennifer had flown in from California again, her expression suggesting she expected either complete capitulation or continued conflict. Tommy came directly from his halfway house, having been granted a few hours' leave to participate in what his treatment team considered family recovery work. Thank you all for coming, Eleanor began, taking her place at the center of the circle. Over the past week, I've been working with Dr. Nolan, Maria Santos, Marcus, and Sophie to develop a comprehensive plan that addresses the concerns you've raised about my living situation while preserving my independence and autonomy. She opened the presentation folder, seeing immediate interest on several faces. I want to share what we've developed and get your input on how to make it work for everyone. For the next hour, Eleanor walked through the graduated independence plan, with each collaborator contributing their expertise. Dr. Nolan explained the medical monitoring components, emphasizing how they would provide early warning of significant changes without creating unnecessary medicalization of normal aging. Maria described the home-based support services, showing how they could be adjusted based on Eleanor's changing needs and preferences. Marcus presented his formalized support role with characteristic quiet competence. I'm willing to commit to daily check-ins, weekly maintenance reviews, and emergency availability, he said. Eleanor and I have already established routines that work well. This would just make them more systematic and accountable to family concerns. Sophie's presentation of the monitoring technology clearly impressed Jennifer. The system tracks patterns rather than specific activities, Sophie explained, showing mock-ups on her laptop. So you can see if Grandma Eleanor is maintaining her normal routines without getting intrusive details about her daily life. and everything is designed to support her independence, not replace her decision-making. Eleanor watched her family process the information, seeing different reactions on different faces. David looked relieved. Here was a solution that honored both his mother's wishes and his wife's concerns. Rebecca appeared thoughtful, her marketing mind clearly evaluating the comprehensive nature of the proposal. Jennifer maintained her professional composure, but Eleanor caught glimpses of surprise and what looked like respect. Tommy spoke first. "This is brilliant, Mom. You've taken control of the planning process instead of just reacting to everyone else's fears." Rebecca leaned forward. "The medical monitoring components address most of my concerns about emergency situations, and having Marcus commit to formal responsibilities provides the reliability I was worried about." "What about costs?" Jennifer asked, her surgeon's precision focusing on practical details. "This seems like it could be expensive, and we still need to address financial oversight." Eleanor had anticipated this question. The monthly costs are actually lower than assisted living, and most of the technology components are one-time expenses. As for financial oversight, I'm willing to work with a financial advisor who can review major expenditures and provide documentation that I'm making informed decisions. Jennifer studied the proposal documents. "You've thought this through comprehensively. This isn't just rejecting assisted living. It's offering a genuine alternative that addresses the underlying concerns." David cleared his throat. "Mom, I have to ask, what happens if your needs change? If you require more intensive support than this system can provide?" Eleanor had prepared for this question too. "We build evaluation criteria into the plan. Regular assessments with Dr. Nolan, family check-ins, objective measures of whether the system is working. If my needs exceed what this arrangement can provide, we revisit the options, but with my participation in the decision-making process." Maria added, "The beauty of graduated systems is that they can evolve. We start with basic supports and add components as needed. Most people can age in place successfully with the right supports, and those who eventually need institutional care do better when they've been part of the planning process." Eleanor looked around the circle, seeing something she hadn't expected: genuine collaboration replacing the power struggle that had defined recent family interactions. "I want to be clear about something," she said. "This isn't about avoiding all risk or pretending that aging doesn't involve changes and challenges. It's about managing those changes in ways that preserve dignity and autonomy while providing appropriate support." Rebecca spoke quietly. "Eleanor, I owe you an apology. I've been so focused on preventing what happened to my mother that I haven't been listening to what you actually need." Jennifer nodded slowly. "I've been approaching this like a medical problem requiring surgical solutions, decisive intervention to prevent worse outcomes. But this is more like managing a chronic condition that requires ongoing adjustment and patient participation." Sophie looked up from her laptop where she'd been taking notes. "So we're all agreeing to try this approach?" Eleanor felt a moment of pure gratitude for her granddaughter's directness. "Are we? Because I want to be clear, this requires everyone to trust the process and commit to honest communication about how it's working." David looked around the circle. "I think we are. This feels like the first real solution we've discussed, not just competing positions." Marcus, who had been quietly observing the family dynamics, spoke up. "Eleanor, what do you need from each of us to make this work?" Eleanor consulted her notes one final time. "From David and Rebecca, I need trust that I can manage my daily life with appropriate support and honest communication about concerns rather than surveillance and documentation. From Jennifer, I need financial consulting rather than financial control, and medical collaboration rather than medical override. From Tommy, I need the knowledge that his recovery isn't dependent on my living situation, and his support in family discussions about independence and dignity." She looked at Marcus and Sophie. "From Marcus, I need the reliability and practical support you've already been providing, formalized in ways that give the family confidence. From Sophie, I need your technological expertise and your advocacy for treating older adults as competent decision-makers. Sophie grinned. Deal, though I still think you should let me set up a blog about aging with dignity. You've got a story that could help other families. Eleanor laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. Let's make sure this works first. Then we can think about sharing it with others. As the meeting concluded with specific assignments and timeline commitments, Eleanor realized they had accomplished something remarkable, transforming a conflict about control into a collaboration about care. The solution wasn't perfect, and it would require ongoing adjustment and communication. But it was theirs, created together rather than imposed by fear or professional authority. Jennifer approached Eleanor as others were leaving. Mother, I want you to know, this is impressive. You've demonstrated leadership and problem-solving ability that honestly surprised me. Eleanor studied her eldest daughter's face, seeing genuine respect rather than condescension. Jennifer, your concerns weren't wrong. Aging does involve risks and changes. But the solution to those concerns doesn't have to involve giving up autonomy. I'm beginning to understand that, Jennifer said. And I'm beginning to understand that distance doesn't give me the right to make decisions for people whose daily lives I don't actually share. As Eleanor watched her family leave, not in the tension and conflict that had characterized recent gatherings, but with specific assignments and shared purposes, she felt something she hadn't experienced since that devastating birthday dinner, hope that they could love each other without needing to control each other. The graduated independence plan wasn't just about her living situation, she realized. It was about the family learning to provide support without demanding surrender, care without control. And perhaps, she thought as she began cleaning up the coffee cups and planning documents, that was the most important lesson any of them could learn. The practical solutions were in place. Now came the harder work of making them function within the complex reality of family relationships, aging, and the ongoing negotiation between safety and freedom that defined the later chapters of any life well lived. The practical solutions were in place. Now came the harder work of making them function within the complex reality of family relationships, aging, and the ongoing negotiation between safety and freedom that defined the later chapters of any life well lived. 6 months later, Eleanor stood in her kitchen on a crisp April morning, arranging flowers from her garden in the crystal vase that had been Thomas's wedding gift to her 38 years ago. The early spring blooms, daffodils, tulips, and the first brave irises filled the room with color and the promise of renewal. Outside her window, Marcus was setting up tables on the back patio, his movements efficient and unhurried, occasionally pausing to consult the notebook where Eleanor had sketched the layout for her 81st birthday celebration. The contrast with last year's devastating dinner felt almost surreal. Instead of a restaurant ambush that had shattered family trust, today would bring a gathering in Eleanor's own home, surrounded by people who had learned to love her without needing to control her. The transformation hadn't been easy or automatic. 6 months of implementing their graduated independence plan had required constant adjustment, honest communication, and the kind of patience that came only from genuine commitment to making relationships work. Eleanor glanced at the discreet monitoring panel Sophie had installed near the kitchen sink. A small screen that displayed her daily activity patterns in gentle graphs, available to family members who wanted peace of mind without surveillance. The technology had become so seamlessly integrated into her routines that she rarely noticed it, though she appreciated knowing that her consistent patterns provided reassurance to David and Rebecca without compromising her privacy. The doorbell announced the arrival of Dr. Nolan, who had become not just Eleanor's physician, but a trusted collaborator in the ongoing project of aging with dignity. She carried a small wrapped package and a bottle of champagne, her professional demeanor softened by genuine friendship. "How are you feeling about today?" Dr. Nolan asked as Eleanor let her in. both women automatically noting the steady way Eleanor navigated the front steps that Marcus had repaired and reinforced months ago. "Grateful," Eleanor said, surprising herself with the honesty of the response. 12 months ago, I thought my family's love was going to destroy my independence. Today, I'm celebrating in my own home with people who've learned that caring about someone doesn't require controlling them." Dr. Nolan smiled, setting down her gifts and accepting the coffee Eleanor offered. "The medical monitoring data from the past 6 months shows remarkable stability. Your blood pressure is well controlled, your cognitive assessments remain within normal ranges for your age, and the activity tracking suggests you're actually more socially engaged than you were a year ago." Eleanor nodded, pouring coffee with hands that remained steady despite her age. "Having support that doesn't undermine my autonomy has been liberating. I'm not spending energy fighting for basic respect, so I can focus on actually living." They were interrupted by voices in the backyard. Marcus directing the arrival of rental chairs while Sophie orchestrated the setup of what she proudly called her digital connection station for Jennifer's remote participation. At 18, Sophie had grown into her role as family diplomat and technology coordinator with remarkable grace, her college acceptance letters serving as daily reminders that Eleanor's fight for independence had created space for everyone in the family to grow. Tommy arrived next, driving the reliable Honda he'd purchased after completing his intensive program and finding steady work as a counselor at a different recovery facility. Eleanor watched through her window as he parked carefully, checked his appearance in the rearview mirror, and walked to her front door with the kind of measured confidence that spoke of ongoing sobriety rather than cocky recovery. "Mom," he said, embracing her with warmth that held no trace of the desperate neediness that had characterized their relationship during his using years. "You look beautiful. This whole setup looks incredible." Eleanor studied her youngest son's face, seeing clear eyes and genuine contentment rather than the brittle cheer of early recovery. "How are you doing, really?" "Really well," Tommy said, and Eleanor believed him. "Work is challenging but rewarding. I'm sponsoring 2 guys in the program, and I actually have savings in the bank. More importantly, I'm learning to have relationships, based on mutual support rather than crisis management." He gestured toward Marcus, who was hanging string lights with the patient precision Eleanor had come to appreciate. "Speaking of relationships, how are things with Marcus? You two seem to have found something special." Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest, not embarrassment at her son's directness, but pleasure at being able to discuss her personal happiness without family judgment. "We have. He's become my partner in the truest sense, someone who supports my independence rather than threatening it." Over the past 6 months, Eleanor's relationship with Marcus had deepened from neighborly support into something richer and more intentional. They had dinner together most evenings, worked in their adjacent gardens, shared books and conversation, and created the kind of companionate partnership that honored both their late spouses and their current needs. The family had adjusted to his presence with varying degrees of grace. David appreciated his reliability, Rebecca respected his competence, and even Jennifer had acknowledged that Eleanor's chosen partner provided better support than institutional care. David and Rebecca arrived with their contribution to the celebration: a carefully researched birthday cake from Eleanor's favorite bakery, and a folder of documents that represented their latest collaboration on Eleanor's financial planning. Rebecca had evolved from anxiety-driven controller to genuine partner in Eleanor's support system, her marketing skills now deployed in researching services and coordinating care rather than documenting supposed failures. "The quarterly financial review?" Rebecca said, handing Eleanor the folder with a smile that held no trace of the desperate authority-seeking that had characterized their early interactions. "Everything looks excellent. Your budget is well within sustainable ranges. The home modification expenses have paid for themselves in reduced accident risk, and the support services are actually costing less than we projected." Eleanor accepted the folder, genuinely appreciating Rebecca's attention to details that supported her independence rather than undermining it. Thank you for managing this. Having objective documentation helps with peace of mind for everyone. David kissed his mother's cheek, his embrace carrying the kind of uncomplicated affection that had been missing from their relationship during the months of family conflict. Mom, I need to tell you something I should have said months ago. Watching you take control of your own care planning, seeing how well this arrangement is working, you've taught me something important about the difference between loving someone and managing them. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes at her middle son's words. David had perhaps changed the most over the past 6 months, finding his voice in family discussions and stepping into a supportive role that honored both his mother's autonomy and his wife's concerns. His relationship with Rebecca had strengthened as they learned to work together rather than being torn between competing loyalties. Sophie burst through the back door with the energy that had made her Eleanor's most effective advocate during the darkest days of family conflict. Grandma Eleanor, Aunt Jennifer is connected and the screen is working perfectly. She says she can see everything and wants to know if you need her to give any speeches today. Eleanor laughed, following Sophie to the digital connection station where Jennifer's face appeared on a large tablet, her California office visible in the background. Even through the screen, Eleanor could see that her eldest daughter looked more relaxed than she had in years, her surgical precision softened by something that looked like genuine contentment. "Mother, you look wonderful," Jennifer said, her voice carrying warmth that had been missing during the crisis months. "The whole setup looks beautiful. I wish I could be there in person, but the connection Sophie set up makes me feel much more included than I expected." Eleanor settled into the chair positioned to optimize their video conversation, marveling at how technology could bridge physical distance in ways that honored relationship rather than replacing it. "How are things with you, Jennifer? Really?" Jennifer's smile held a self-awareness that suggested genuine reflection. "Better than they've been in years, honestly. Learning to trust your judgment instead of trying to override it from 3,000 miles away has been liberating for me too. I'm less anxious about your well-being because I know you're actively managing it. And I'm more focused on my own life because I'm not constantly worried about situations I can't actually control." The past 6 months had transformed Jennifer's relationship with the family from long-distance micromanagement to genuine consultation and support. She had established monthly video calls with Eleanor that focused on connection rather than assessment, contributed to financial planning through expertise rather than control, and learned to trust the local support system rather than assuming. That distance made her perspective more objective. "Jennifer," Eleanor said, "I want you to know how much I appreciate the way you've adjusted your approach. Having your medical expertise available for consultation rather than override has been invaluable." As more guests arrived, neighbors who had become genuine friends, former colleagues who valued Eleanor's continuing intellectual engagement, volunteers from the library who appreciated her ongoing contributions, the celebration took on the warmth of a community gathering rather than a family obligation. Eleanor moved through her home with the easy grace of someone hosting in their own space, accepting congratulations and affection with the dignity that had been threatened but never destroyed. Marcus appeared at her elbow with a glass of champagne, and a smile that made Eleanor feel genuinely beautiful rather than merely well-preserved. "How does it feel, being the center of all this positive attention?" Eleanor accepted the champagne, letting her fingers brush Marcus's hand in a gesture of intimacy that still surprised her with its naturalness. "It feels like victory. Not over my family, but with them. We all won something important, the right to love each other without needing to control each other." The afternoon unfolded with the kind of relaxed celebration that comes from genuine affection rather than duty. Tommy shared stories from his work that revealed both his ongoing recovery and his growing wisdom about helping others navigate their own struggles. David and Rebecca collaborated on organizing activities with the kind of partnership that suggested their marriage had been strengthened rather than strained by the family crisis. Sophie documented everything with the enthusiasm of someone who understood that she was witnessing something historically significant in her family's evolution. Dr. Nolan offered a toast that perfectly captured the day's significance. To Eleanor, who taught all of us that aging with dignity isn't about avoiding change, but about remaining the author of your own story, even as that story evolves. As the sun began to set and guests gradually departed, Eleanor found herself sitting on her back patio with Marcus, Tommy, David, Rebecca, and Sophie, while Jennifer remained connected through the digital screen. The conversation had settled into the comfortable rhythm of family members who genuinely enjoyed each other's company rather than simply fulfilling obligations. "So what's next?" Sophie asked, her question directed at Eleanor but clearly of interest to everyone present. Eleanor considered the question thoughtfully. At 81, she had no illusions about the challenges that lay ahead. Aging would bring changes, losses, adjustments that would require ongoing negotiation between independence and support. But she also had something she hadn't possessed a year ago: confidence that those challenges would be met through collaboration rather than coercion. "More of this," Eleanor said, gesturing to encompass the group gathered around her. "Continuing to age in place with support that honors my autonomy." Watching Tommy continue his recovery, Sophie start college, David and Rebecca build their partnership, Jennifer balance her career with family connection, and Marcus. She looked at her partner with affection that still surprised her with its depth, continuing to explore what it means to build a loving relationship in the 8th decade of life. Marcus reached for her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "And watching you continue to teach all of us about the difference between being careful and being afraid, between accepting help and surrendering agency." Jennifer's voice came through the screen with unusual emotion. "Mother, I need to say something. A year ago, I thought loving you meant making decisions for you. I've learned that loving you means trusting you to make decisions with appropriate support. You've taught me something important about respect and autonomy that I'm actually applying in my own relationships." Tommy leaned forward, his voice carrying the kind of hard-won wisdom that comes from surviving your own worst choices. "Mom, what you've created here, this system that supports your independence instead of undermining it, it's like a recovery program for families. You've shown us how to care about each other without trying to control each other." Eleanor looked around at the faces of people who had learned to love her without needing to manage her, feeling a contentment she hadn't experienced since Thomas's death. The monitoring systems hummed quietly in the background, providing reassurance without surveillance. The support services she'd chosen functioned smoothly, enhancing her independence rather than replacing it. The relationships she'd fought to preserve had been transformed into something stronger and more respectful than what had existed before the crisis. "I want to be clear about something," Eleanor said, her voice carrying the authority that had never been diminished by age or circumstance. "This isn't about pretending that aging doesn't involve challenges or changes. I know there may come a time when I need more intensive support, maybe even institutional care. The difference is that, if and when that time comes, it will be my decision, made with your consultation and support, rather than your decision imposed despite my objections." David nodded, his expression reflecting genuine understanding. "The difference between being prepared for possible futures and being controlled by fear of them." Rebecca added, "And the difference between family members supporting each other's decisions and family members making decisions for each other." As the evening deepened and the celebration wound toward its natural conclusion, Eleanor felt a deep satisfaction that had little to do with the success of the party and everything to do with the transformation of relationships that had made such a celebration possible. The graduated independence plan had worked not because it eliminated all risks or concerns, but because it had created space for everyone in the family to grow into healthier roles. Sophie began packing up her technology, with the efficient competence that would serve her well in college and beyond. "Grandma Eleanor, I'm writing my college application essay about this whole experience, about what I learned about justice and dignity, by watching you fight for your right to make your own decisions. Eleanor felt a surge of pride in her granddaughters, growth and wisdom. "What's your main argument going to be?" Sophie grinned, her young face bright with intellectual excitement. "That love that doesn't respect autonomy isn't really love. It's anxiety management. And that families work best when they support each other's agency rather than trying to control each other's choices." Tommy laughed, the sound carrying genuine joy rather than desperate humor. "From the mouths of babes, though I guess at 18, Sophie's hardly a babe anymore." As the family began the process of cleaning up and saying goodbyes, Eleanor realized that the evening represented more than just a successful birthday celebration. It marked the completion of a transformation that had begun with that devastating dinner at Milano's. A journey from conflict to collaboration, from control to support, from fear-based decisions to trust-based relationships. Jennifer's image on the screen began to flicker as the connection prepared to end. "Mother, I love you, and I'm proud of you. Not just for getting older, but for showing all of us how to do it with grace and dignity." Eleanor felt tears in her eyes as she responded, "I love you too, Jennifer. All of you. Thank you for learning to love me in ways that honor who I am, rather than who you think I should be." As Marcus helped Eleanor move through her house, turning off lights and securing doors with the comfortable routine they'd established over months of shared domesticity, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 12 months ago, she had been fighting for the basic right to remain in her own home. Tonight, she was surrounded by a support system she had helped design, relationships she had helped transform, and a future she would continue to author with. Appropriate collaboration from people who respected her autonomy. The monitoring systems would continue their quiet surveillance, providing peace of mind without intrusion. The support services would adapt to her changing needs while preserving her decision-making authority. The family relationships would continue to evolve, guided by respect rather than fear, trust rather than control. Eleanor's future remained uncertain in the ways that all futures are uncertain, but it was secure in the most important way possible. It belonged to her, supported by people who had learned that caring about someone means respecting their right to remain the primary author of their own story, even as that story moved into its final chapters. Standing in her own kitchen, in the home she had fought to keep, surrounded by the evidence of relationships transformed and dignity preserved, Eleanor Hartwell felt something she hadn't experienced since that shocking birthday dinner. Complete. Confidence that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would meet them as herself, with support that honored rather than diminished who she was. The last stand had become a new beginning, and the victory belonged not just to Eleanor, but to everyone who had learned that love and respect could coexist, that safety and freedom could be balanced, and that aging could be a collaborative process rather than a surrender of agency. Eleanor's 81st birthday was ending, but her life, lived on her own terms, with dignity intact and relationships renewed, was entering its next chapter with hope, support, and the hard-won knowledge that some battles are worth fighting not just for victory, but for the transformation they create in everyone involved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.